The first time I saw the bank alert, I thought it had to be a mistake. I was sitting in the notary's waiting room, gripping the leather strap of my bag, trying to keep a steady breath. The notification sat there like a bruise on my screen. $18,500 withdrawn from college fund, processed. My thumb hovered over it. My reflection caught in the black glass of my phone. Across from me, my younger brother Ethan lounged in a chair, one arm draped over the backrest, scrolling his screen like we were just killing time before some paperwork. His legs crossed, a smirk almost playing at the corner of his mouth. The bank rep's voice over the phone had been maddeningly calm earlier. Yes, the transfer was authorized. Authorized by who? I hadn't touched that account in months, not since Dad died. That money wasn't just numbers in an app. It was my daughter Lily's future, a promise Dad and I swore we'd keep after my divorce left us starting over. My grip on my phone tightened when I remembered the text that had come just minutes after the transaction. It's what Dad would have wanted. It was from Ethan. I glanced at him now, lit by the waiting room's two bright fluorescents, like he didn't just casually gut my daughter's tuition plan. The notary's secretary shuffled papers behind her desk, the sound of sorting and rubber bands snapping, mundane noises against the drumbeat in my chest. Every part of me wanted to storm across the room, demand he return the money this instant. But then I imagined his look, that maddening, incredulous smile he used whenever he wanted to make me seem hysterical. Relax, you're overreacting. What made me sick was the setting. We were here because the lawyer and notary needed our final signatures for distribution of Dad's estate. My half had been partly tied to that fund, not in name, but in the way the accounts were arranged. Legally, it was messy enough that if I launched straight into accusations, it could hurt me just as much as him. And Ethan knew it. He always knew where the loopholes were. I locked my phone and pressed it flat against my leg, never breaking eye contact with him. I wanted him to flinch. He didn't. The secretary finally looked up and said, "They'll see you both now." Ethan stood first, straightened his cuffs, and nodded toward the hallway. "After you, sis," he said, voice syrupy, mocking. I stepped forward, heart pounding with the knowledge that I was about to walk into a room where my brother had already stolen nearly $19,000 from my child, and I had no idea yet how the hell to prove it. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't impulsive. This had been in motion for months, and his trail was just waiting for me to find it. Shall I write the next chapter? Walking into the notary's private office felt like stepping into a different temperature. Cooler, heavier, the air pressing at my temples. I sat down across from Ethan and beside our lawyer, Mr. Klein, who was already arranging a neat stack of folders on the polished mahogany desk. He smiled that courteous, neutral smile lawyers wear when they know tensions are humming beneath the surface. I forced my own smile in return, though my thoughts kept peeling away to Lily's face, the way she'd once traced her fingers over a campus brochure at the kitchen table. 2 years from now, she'd be there. Or she had been supposed to be. That fund was more than money. It was her ticket to not fighting the same uphill mess I'd lived through at her age. "Before we begin," Mr. Klein said, "I want to remind you both that while the estate is closing, there are still linked accounts relevant to your portions. So please, any concerns?" Ethan jumped in smoothly. "No concerns on my end. Just want to make sure everything moves forward fairly." His choice of the word fairly hung in the air like a threat dressed up as virtue. I almost blurted out, "Then give back the 18,500 you just stole." But I hesitated. If I pushed now, without tangible proof, Klein might shelve my complaint as a family dispute, leaving the account open for Ethan to drain completely. And part of why this was tangled was Dad's own doing, tying accounts together to keep it simple. Simple for him, maybe, but now the mess was a playground for Ethan's opportunism. Let's proceed, I said instead, my voice steady in a way that cost me effort. Ethan gave me a tight, polite smile, as if humoring a child, and I felt that old, familiar spike in my chest, the exact one I used to get in middle school when he'd charm our parents out of punishing him for stolen lunch money by pretending I had misplaced it. The notary slid forms toward him first, then to me. My pen hovered, but I signed. Just the routine estate documents. Through the corner of my eye, I caught Ethan's hand move to his phone twice during the meeting. A quick flick of the screen, a faint grin. He wasn't worried, not yet. Walking out into the hallway afterward, Klein's assistant handed us both copies of the signed documents. I clutched mine tighter than necessary, thinking of that text. It's what Dad would have wanted. He always cloaked greed in the flag of family intention. And if he thought he could make me swallow that this time, he didn't know I'd already decided. If I couldn't stop him here today, I'd start somewhere smaller. Something he wouldn't see coming. Because before the money vanished, there had been little signs. Ones I'd brushed off as harmless. And now I understood. They were the first cracks in the dam. Shall I write the next chapter? The first one was so small, I barely noticed. A month after Dad's funeral, Ethan sent me a forward from Mr. Klein's office, supposedly the latest draft of the estate paperwork. But the email was empty, just the subject line and a clipped FYI. When I asked for the attachment, he claimed he must have forgotten to include it. The next was a group email about Dad's belongings, where Ethan replied, all suggesting Lily probably wouldn't be interested in the old photo albums. It stung, not because of the albums, but the implication that my daughter and I were somehow less connected to the family history. To everyone else, it read as a practical comment. To me, it was a quiet exclusion. Then came the jokes. Little barbs dressed up as humor, often over family dinners. Let Lil work part-time like the rest of us did. Builds character. His smirk made it clear it wasn't a suggestion. It was a seed he wanted planted in other people's heads. At the time, I told myself not to overreact. I was tired, still managing Lily's school schedule, my job, and the waves of estate paperwork. But now, sitting at my kitchen table with my coffee going cold, I could see the pattern. Ethan had been probing, testing just how far he could push without me shoving back. And Dad's way of keeping things in the family had given Ethan all the camouflage he needed. The college fund account lived in a gray zone, tied to my half of the estate, but technically accessible by either of us as co-trustees until final distribution. It was supposed to be a safeguard. Instead, it was a crack wide enough for Ethan to reach through. I pulled up our last 6 months of text messages. In between the casual updates, there were requests. Can you scan me a copy of that old signature card? Hey, send the login for the doc sharing. Need to grab Dad's insurance papers. At the time, every ask made sense. In hindsight, each one looked like part of a blueprint. I leaned back, staring at the ceiling. If he'd done this much planning, confronting him straight on would only make him dig in. And I already knew the next move he would make. One he'd used before when cornered. He'd try to make me look unstable. He'd turn my accusation into another one of her overreactions. And I had the feeling he'd already started. Shall I write the next chapter? I didn't even have to wait 24 hours to see it happen. The phone rang just after dinner. Aunt Marie. She opened with that slow, syrupy, cautionary tone people use when they're bracing for an explosion. Sweetie, I heard there's some stress around the estate. Are you okay? You sound a little tense lately. The back of my neck prickled. This was how Ethan worked. He wouldn't just deny what he'd done. He'd plant the idea in other people's heads that I was fragile, agitated, maybe even paranoid. That way, if I did accuse him, the story was already tilting out of my favor. "What exactly did you hear?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "Oh, nothing serious," she said too quickly. "Just that you're under a lot of pressure, and maybe you're imagining slights? Ethan said you've been misreading things." Misreading things. My jaw clenched so hard it ached. I thanked her for calling, ended the conversation, and sat in the half-light of my living room, staring at the shadow of the coffee table legs on the floor. So he was already spinning it. The same old trick from when we were kids, and he'd break something, then tell our parents I'd been acting weird all week. So maybe I did it on accident and forgot. The worst part was the veneer of reasonableness he wrapped everything in. When I called him half an hour later, opening with a blunt, "Did you take 18.5 from Lily's fund?" he gave a light laugh and replied, "Whoa, you okay? That's a pretty big accusation. Maybe call the bank. Your ex still has old access, right?" I gripped the phone tighter, my whole body hot. "Don't gaslight me. I got a text from you. Right after it happened." "Right after what, exactly?" "Look, you're stressed. Estate stuff is messy. Let's not make it messier," he said, as if he were doing me a favor. By the time the call ended, my hands were shaking so badly I had to set the phone down on the counter. I wasn't sure what infuriated me more, the theft itself, or how easily he was turning me into the dramatic sister in everybody else's ears. And then came the final twist of the knife. The next morning, Mr. Klein's office called to remind us both to bring any concerns to the memorial donation handover happening in 2 days. Yes, in front of other relatives. I knew exactly what Ethan would do with that stage. Shall I write the next chapter? The notary's conference room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. It was supposed to be a dignified occasion. We were handing over the memorial check for the charity Dad had supported for decades. A handful of relatives and 2 board members from the charity sat around the table, murmuring in that soft, respectful way people do when they want the room to feel solemn. Ethan was in his element. He wore a navy blazer that made him look trustworthy, dependable, the kind of son board members would nod approvingly at. I should have known he wouldn't waste an opportunity like this. When Mr. Klein invited him to say a few words on behalf of the family, Ethan stood, hands loosely clasped in front of him, and began. "Dad always believed in giving every child the same shot at life. Equal opportunity, regardless of birth order, circumstance, or luck." He glanced in my direction for half a second, just long enough for the darts to land. "That's why we've worked hard through this estate process, to make sure the next generation in our family, all of them, are taken care of, not just one." It was a masterclass in implication, not a single outright accusation, but the eyes around the table shifted subtly to me. I felt my cheeks burn, not with shame, but with the precise fury of knowing exactly what he'd just done. When Klein passed me the envelope with the check for the charity, our fingers brushed, and maybe he felt the tremor there because he gave me a quick, unreadable look, as if to say, "Don't." But I swallowed my urge to snap back at Ethan in front of everyone. That's what he wanted. After the handshake photos, Aunt Marie sidled over to Ethan and asked loudly, "So, how are things going with making sure everyone's set up?" He launched into one of his smooth, measured explanations about adjusting allocations and making sure things are balanced. Every word carved its way through me. This was the danger. His performance changed the room. Even if I said something now, people would filter it through the version of reality he'd been seeding for weeks. I pressed my nails into my palm until it hurt, and told myself it didn't matter if they believed me yet. I just needed one opening, one moment where his mask slipped in front of the right eyes. When that came, I wouldn't waste it. 2 days later, I thought I had my moment, but Ethan showed up with a weapon I hadn't seen coming. Shall I write the next chapter? 2 days later, I sat across from Mr. Klein in his office, determined to finally get something, anything, in writing to protect Lily's fund. My plan was simple: request a temporary freeze on any withdrawals from the estate-linked accounts until the final distribution. I'd rehearsed my words in the mirror that morning. I was ready. But when I slid the printed request across the desk, Klein's expression shifted just enough to make my stomach go hollow. He glanced at Ethan, sitting smugly in the corner chair, and then back at me. "Your brother has already provided an authorization, with your signature, instructing the release of those funds," Klein said, his tone careful, almost apologetic. It took me a second to register what he'd said. My signature? Ethan pulled a sheet from his folder with practiced ease, sliding it toward me like a magician revealing a card. There it was. My name. My handwriting. Except I'd never signed that document in my life. The date was from 3 weeks ago. "You sent it yourself, remember?" Ethan said, feigning confusion. "Attached to one of those emails about the memorial plans." The audacity was dizzying. My mouth went dry, my pulse a heavy thud in my ears. "That's not my—" Klein raised a hand gently. "We'll have to verify this before making any changes to account access. Unfortunately, without that verification, I can't legally freeze anything at this point." Just like that, the window I thought I was opening slammed shut. Ethan folded the paper neatly back into his folder, as though tidying away loose ends. His eyes flicked to me, the slightest spark of triumph before he masked it behind a neutral expression. Walking out of the building, I wanted to scream into the cold winter air. My reasonable plan had just been turned into a dead end by a forged piece of paper. And in that moment, I realized something awful. Ethan hadn't just stolen the money. He'd laid out a lattice of plausible deniability so meticulously that even the lawyer was leaning toward his story over mine. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, phone in hand, replaying every single message, every innocuous request he'd ever made for my signature or documents. Somewhere in there, I knew, was the key to ripping his perfect lie apart. Shall I write the next chapter? It was nearly midnight when I found it. My laptop screen glowed in the dim kitchen light, coffee gone cold beside me. I'd opened my old email archives, the ones I hadn't touched in months, and started searching. Every thread with Ethan's name, every attachment, every request. 4 months back, there it was. Subject line: guest book idea. The body of the email was short, casual. "Hey, could you send me that clean scan of your signature? Mom's old reunion guest book is missing a few family autographs, and I thought we could reprint them for the next get-together." I remembered smiling at the thought back then, attaching a neatly scanned JPEG of my signature and sending it off without hesitation. Of course Ethan had kept it. Of course he'd sat on it until he could weaponize it. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. 2 weeks before the unauthorized transfer, there was a file auto-forward from my email to an old work address of his, one I hadn't seen in years. It was a bank alert, the exact format I'd received when $18,500 vanished. The forward rule was buried in my settings, set months earlier. He'd been getting every alert all along, my nails tapped against the table. This wasn't sloppy opportunism. This was calculated. And that meant I could prove it. The time-stamped original email, the attachment containing my clean signature scan, the forwarding rule to an unrelated address. All of it together formed a chain even Ethan couldn't talk his way out of. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest pull of satisfaction in my chest. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't paranoid. He'd done exactly what my instincts told me he had. The next step wasn't going to be an argument across Mom's old kitchen table, or whispered fury in a notary's hallway. No, it had to be controlled, documented, undeniable. It had to be in front of someone with the power to act immediately, someone like Mr. Klein, without cousins and aunts muddying the water. I closed my laptop, the sharp click of the latch loud in the quiet kitchen. I knew what I needed to do, and I knew it had to be soon, before Ethan found another hole to slip through. The only question was, could I get him into the lawyer's office without tipping him off that I had the smoking gun? Shall I write the next chapter? I barely slept that night, the weight of those emails and timestamps burning a hot, focused line through my thoughts. By sunrise, I drafted a plan. Step 1. Book a routine check-in with Mr. Klein under the pretext of confirming final estate distributions. Step 2. Show him the proof before Ethan even entered the room. Step 3. Invite Ethan in after. Klein had already processed the evidence. That morning, I called Klein's assistant, keeping my voice light and casual, as if I hadn't spent nights obsessed with pinpricks of digital paper trails. Just want to make sure there are no outstanding surprises before we close things, I said. She offered me a slot 2 days later. Perfect. Until then, I kept my tone with Ethan measured, neutral. I even sent a fake text asking if he could bring the latest draft with him to Klein's office when we met, so he'd feel like he was dictating the agenda. I think that little ego stroke sealed it, he replied with a thumbs up. 2 days later, I arrived at Klein's office 15 minutes early. The waiting room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, the blinds filtering slats of cold late winter light onto the carpet. When Klein ushered me into his office, I wasted no time. The emails, the scan of my signature, the forwarding rule, all laid out in print, with electronic timestamps displayed on my laptop. Klein's reaction was subtle but undeniable. His brows pulled together, a frown that wasn't for me, but for the situation. "This is problematic," he said, voice low. "Leave these with me. I'm going to want him to respond to this in person." "Today," I said. "We can't let him touch anything else." Klein pressed his intercom, asked the assistant to bring Ethan in, and for a moment, as the sound of footsteps approached the door, I let myself breathe, knowing we were on my timing now, not his. This time, my brother wouldn't be walking into a stage he'd scripted for himself. The door opened, and Ethan stepped in, casual as ever, but the way his face shifted when he saw both my laptop and the printed documents on Klein's desk. That was the first crack in his armor. Shall I write the next chapter? Ethan's eyes darted from the stack of printed emails to my laptop screen, then to Klein's face. It was quick, a flicker of calculation, but I caught it. He recovered almost instantly, sliding into the chair like we were about to discuss nothing more consequential than a lunch menu. "What's all this?" he asked, feigning curiosity. Klein leaned forward, hands clasped. "Ethan, we have documentation here that raises very serious concerns. A scanned copy of your sister's signature sent to you months ago, in an email unrelated to estate matters, later used to authorize a substantial withdrawal from the college fund. A forwarding rule sending her bank alerts to your old work address. I'll need you to explain." For once, Ethan didn't leap into performance mode. Even he knew that against hard timestamps and exact IP logs, banter was useless. But he tried anyway, exhaling sharply like he was insulted. "This is blown way out of proportion. The withdrawal was just a reallocation of family assets. And that guest book scan? I thought she knew I might need her signature for estate instructions. It's semantics." I couldn't stop myself. Semantics is signing off on your nephew's birthday card without asking. This is forgery and theft. Klein let the word hang in the air for a moment before adding, "Legally speaking, your sister's correct. This kind of unauthorized signature use can cross into criminal territory. My duty is to the terms of the estate, and this jeopardizes your standing in the distribution." There it was, the first solid shift of power in weeks. Ethan's confident posture stiffened. He glanced at me then, just for a moment, and I saw something I hadn't in a long time. Not smugness, not calculated control. Fear. "This is absurd," he muttered, but his voice lacked its usual steady rhythm. Klein began outlining immediate steps: a freeze on all joint accounts, a written record of Ethan's redirection of funds, and a stipulation that repayment to Lily's fund would come directly from his remaining share of the estate. I didn't look away from him as Klein spoke. I wanted him to see in my face that the game had changed. Walking out of the office afterward, I knew the hit to the money was coming. What I didn't yet realize was how deep the fallout would run in the rest of the family once word spread about what had just happened in that room. Shall I write the next chapter? Word traveled faster than I expected. By that evening, my phone was vibrating with a barrage of group chat notifications, the family thread lighting up with half-formed sentences, clapping hand emojis, and a few awkward gifs that didn't make sense out of context. It only took me 2 minutes of scrolling to realize Ethan had already pivoted to damage control. In one thread, he claimed the college fund issue was a misunderstanding we resolved privately, framing it as a me problem blown up by stress. In another, he blamed technical errors for the withdrawal and hinted that the lawyer had been overly strict. The goal was obvious: blur the facts, keep people on the fence, make confrontation feel messy and avoidable. But the real blow was the phone call from Aunt Marie, her voice much colder this time. "Why would you go to a lawyer about your own brother instead of working it out in the family? Now it's humiliating for everyone." I almost laughed at the absurdity. Work it out in the family? That's exactly how Ethan stayed clean for years. Everything stayed behind the curtain. "Because it wasn't being worked out," I said. "And family doesn't mean he gets to drain my daughter's future without consequences." There was a pause, just long enough to tell me she didn't buy it, or maybe didn't want to. I hung up with my pulse racing, realizing the divide was no longer just between me and Ethan. This would split the family down the middle. Days later, Klein forwarded me the notarized letter finalizing the freeze and detailing Ethan's deduction to replenish Lily's fund. It was official. The money would come from his share before a single cent reached him. That's when another update hit my inbox. A real estate alert for a condo Ethan had been under contract to buy. Status: sale canceled. The missing down payment had left him short, and without family allies rushing in with sympathy loans, his deal had collapsed completely. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe without feeling like I needed to defend my sanity to the entire family. The fallout hadn't just been financial. For Ethan, this was a public crack in the image he'd worked so hard to project. But there was still one last step to take if I wanted to make sure he never tried something like this again. And it had nothing to do with lawyers or money. It had to do with drawing a line he couldn't charm or bully his way past. Shall I write the next chapter? I asked Mr. Klein to draft one final document, not part of the estate distribution, but a legally binding communication clause. The language was simple. All correspondence between Ethan and me, about anything, would go through Klein's office. No more casual texts, no more back-channel requests dressed up as family favors. If Ethan wanted something, he'd have to put it in writing, to my lawyer, knowing it would be preserved in a file. When the clause went through, Klein's assistant sent me a copy. I read it 3 times before tucking it into Lily's college fund folder. That folder was more than just statements now. It was the physical promise that I'd done everything to protect her future. Ethan didn't call or message after that. The silence was unsettling at first, like waiting for a shoe to drop. But nothing came. No sarcastic comments filtered down through relatives. No carefully baited traps in family group chats. Just absence. A vacuum where his voice used to be. Of course, the family split remained. Some relatives still saw me as the overly legal one, the sister who took it too far. But I'd noticed a subtle shift with others. Small, quiet affirmations. A cousin who texted me privately, "Glad the money's safe for Lily." An uncle who side-eyed Ethan at Easter and made sure I got the first slice of pie, not him. Late one night, after Lily had gone to bed, I sat on the couch scrolling through old photos. There was one of Dad and Lily at her 10th birthday, leaning over the cake together. It hit me then. This wasn't just about protecting money. It was about upholding a promise Dad intended to keep, even if he hadn't foreseen how messy the estate would get. Sometimes family love is real, and sometimes there are people in your bloodline who will use that love as leverage until you tell them unequivocally that the line is shut. I'd been afraid to be the difficult sister for too long, but difficult had kept my daughter's future intact. And for me, that was worth every phone call, every cold shoulder, every whisper behind my back.